I have not slept in 20 days, and I am writing this while I still remember which parts of me are mine. You learn a few things working backcountry for the Park Service. You learn that the mountains do not care whether you live. You learn to read a trail the way other people read a face. And you learn that every hollow in these old ranges has a story the locals will tell you with a smile, right up until the sun starts to go down, and then they will stop smiling and tell you to be off the ridge before the light fails. I used to think that was charm. I used to think it was the kind of thing you sell to tourists, along with the jam and the carved walking sticks. I was the one who guided them in. 6 clients, a private overnight package, the sort of the office books in the slow weeks when the big groups thin out. I checked their permits at the trailhead and counted heads against my list. And I want to put their names down now because names matter and because somebody should remember them as people and not as the thing that happened to them. Oscar Armstrong, 50, was the one who paid. He had the bearing of a man who had spent his life being agreed with. He wanted to push deeper than the package allowed into a valley the maps marked, but the service no longer maintained because he had read about an old homestead down there, and he wanted his photographs to be of something nobody else had. Elaine Brooks, 56, came with him. She had been a nurse for 30 years, and you could see it in the way she watched the elders of the group, always counting their breaths without seeming to. She was the only one who asked me how far the nearest help was. I told her 4 hours of hard hiking to the road and another hour by truck. She nodded like she was filing it away. Philip Harper was 75 and slow and proud of being there anyway. He carried a flask of his heart medicine in his breast pocket and a photograph of his late wife in the other. And he would touch both throughout the day the way some people touch a railing on a stair. Carla Grant was 32, the youngest by a long stretch, and she was photographing the trip for Oscar. She had a good eye. She noticed things the others walked past. That turned out to matter more than her camera did. Terrence Riley, 60, had brought a rifle, which the package did not allow, but he had a permit folded into his pack that said he could hunt the adjoining land, and he was the kind of man who likes to be the one who is ready. The rifle was clean and oiled, and he checked it twice the first afternoon. I told him there was nothing down here worth shooting. He smiled and said, "You never know." And Gloria Fox, 70, was the last to reach the trailhead and the first to go quiet when she saw where we were headed. She had grown up 2 hollows over, she told me, before the families moved out and the land went back to the state. She had wanted to see the country of her childhood one more time. She wore a small gray stone on a cord around her neck, a stone with a hole worn clean through the middle of it. And when Carla asked about it, Gloria said it was a hagstone, and that her grandmother had given it to her so she would always be able to see what was really there. The way down into that valley took the better part of the day, and I felt the country change under us the deeper we went. Up on the ridge, the woods were the ordinary woods of these mountains, oak and hickory and the steady talk of birds. But the trail dropped through a notch in the rock about midday, and on the far side of it, the birds went quiet, and the trees grew older and closer together, and a kind of stillness came up to meet us that I have only ever felt in places people have decided to leave alone. Carla felt it too. She stopped taking photographs for a long stretch in there, and when I asked her why, she said the light was wrong, that it did not fall the way light should, and she could not explain it past that. I have thought since that she was the only one of us seeing clearly that whole first day, and that none of us knew how to listen to her. Gloria walked slower the farther down we went, and not from her age. She knew the shapes of the ground. She would stop at a tumble of stones and tell us it had been a spring house, or point up a side hollow and say a family named Combs had lived there once, 3 generations. and that they had pulled out in a single autumn and never said why. She said it without drama. She said it the way you read a name off a stone. By the time we reached the valley floor, she had gone almost entirely silent, and her hand kept going to the gray stone at her throat the way Phillips went to his medicine and his photograph. We reached the homestead an hour before the light went soft. It sat at the bottom of the valley where two creeks met. A cabin that someone had half restored for the lease and a barn that no one had touched in 50 years, leaning into the slope like a tired animal. There were horses, 6 of them, in a sagging paddock behind the barn, half wild and watchful, the sort that a neighbor up the ridge half tends and mostly leaves alone. They came to the fence when we arrived. They did not come for apples or for attention. They came to look at us, all 6 lined along the rail, and they watched us the way Gloria had watched the valley. The first evening was almost good. We had a fire and a meal, and Philip told a long, slow story about a fish he had not actually caught 40 years before, and Elaine laughed in the right places. And even Terrence set the rifle down against the log and let himself be a man at a campfire instead of a guard at a gate. Oscar talked about the photographs he would take of the barn in the morning fog. There was one moment in there I keep coming back to. Carla had wandered off to the edge of the firelight to get a shot of the cabin against the last of the sky, and she came back frowning at the little screen on the back of her camera, and she turned it so Elaine and I could see. In the photograph, the cabin sat where it should, and the trees behind it, and over the roof line there was a smear of pale light, low and long and shaped almost like a figure leaning down toward the chimney. Carla said it was the lens. She said it was a reflection of the fire or moisture on the glass, or the long exposure catching her own movement. She gave us 4 good reasons for it before anyone had asked her for one, and I understand now that she was not explaining the picture to us. She was explaining it to herself. Elaine said it was probably just the way the firelight carried. We let it go. We were so good, all of us, at letting things go. Carla took a picture of all of them in the firelight that I have thought about every night since, because in it, they are still whole. It was Gloria who said the thing I want you to remember. She was looking at the black shapes of the horses against the last green of the sky, and she said quiet, like it was nothing, that the old folks who lived in these hollows had a saying. The surest way to be rid of a bad dream, she said, is to give it to somebody else. You speak it into a sleeping ear before the sun comes up, and the dream gets up and walks across to them, and you are free of it. Her grandmother swore by it. You could pass anything, Gloria said, if you were willing to let it ride someone you loved. Carla laughed and asked if it worked. Gloria did not laugh. She said it worked. That was the trouble with it. I did not think about it again that night. I thought about the weather, which was turning, and about the trail out, which I had not liked the look of coming in, washed thin in 2 places where the creek had jumped its bank in the spring. I thought about the small, ordinary problems of keeping 6 people alive in the backcountry for 2 days. If you are out here with me on these long nights, and you want more stories from these hollows, you can follow along and come back for the next one. But stay with me now, because this is where it stops being ordinary. I woke before dawn to the horses screaming. It is a sound you do not forget, not a whinny, not a call. A horse in terror sounds almost human, and there were 6 of them, and they were all making that sound at once. I was out of the cabin with my light before I was properly awake, and Terrence was a step behind me with the rifle, and we ran to the paddock expecting a bear or a cat, expecting tracks, expecting something we could name. There was nothing. The horses stood in the half-light, every one of them lathered white with sweat, sides heaving, eyes rolling, foam dripping from their mouths as though they had been ridden hard for hours. There was no rider. There were no tracks in or out of the paddock, but the ones the horses had worn themselves into the mud. And every horse, every single one, had its mane twisted and knotted into tight little braids, dozens of them. The hair plaited into something that looked deliberate, looked done by patient fingers in the deep of the night, in a paddock that no one had entered. Gloria came up behind us in her nightclothes, the hagstone in her fist. She looked at the braided manes and the foaming horses for a long time, and she did not say anything clever, and she did not say anything to comfort us. She just put her free hand over her mouth. Then Philip started screaming from the cabin, and we ran back. And we found him sitting up in his cot with both hands at his own throat, fighting to pull in air that would not come, his eyes fixed on the foot of his bed as if something we could not see was still sitting there, looking back at him. Elaine got Philip breathing again. It took her a long time, and the whole while he was trying to talk. And what he kept saying when the air finally came back to him was that something had been sitting on his chest. He described it the way a child describes a fever dream, and we all wanted to file it away as exactly that. He said he had woken in the night, fully awake, certain of it, and that he had not been able to move so much as a finger. He said there was a weight on him, pressing down on his ribs, heavy as a person, and that he could feel the cold of it through the blanket. He said he could not turn his head, but that out of the corner of his eye he could see something crouched on his chest, long and thin and patient, and that it was leaning down toward his face, and that the worst part, the part that made the old man weep telling it, was that it was breathing in time with him. Every breath he managed to drag in, it took out of him. And he knew, the way you know things in that state, that if he ever stopped fighting, if he ever let it set its own rhythm, he would simply stop breathing and never start again. Oscar wanted to leave. So did I. That was the right instinct, and I wanted on the record that we had it. But the weather had come down off the high ground in the night, low cloud pouring into the valley like water into a bowl, and the rain had started, fine and steady, the kind that does not look like much and turns a thin wash trail into a slick of mud over loose stone. I went up to the first crossing alone to look at it, and the creek had risen brown and fast over the place where the path used to be, and I came back and told them the truth, which was that taking 6 people, 3 of them past 70, up that trail in this would get someone killed for certain. We would wait the rain out. 1 day, 2 at the most. The radio could not raise the office from the bottom of the valley. The ridges swallowed the signal, so I could not call it in. I told myself 1 day would not matter. That was the day Gloria told us what she knew. It was a long day to fill. The rain shut us into the cabin in the valley, and there is a particular cruelty in being made to wait in a place that frightens you because fear wants somewhere to go, and there is nowhere. We took turns walking the short loop to the barn and back, just to move, and every time someone came back in, they came back quieter. I went out once in the middle of the afternoon to check on the horses because it seemed like the responsible thing, the ranger thing. And they were standing in the rain in a tight knot in the corner of the paddock with their heads low, and not one of them was eating, though there was hay. They had untwisted their own manes through the day, worried the braids loose with their teeth and against the rails, and the ground was littered with little knots of horsehair like something molted. When I came to the fence, they all turned their heads to look at me at the same instant, the 6 of them together, and I went back to the cabin, and I did not tell the others because there are some things you carry alone so the people in your care can keep their good sense a little longer. She gathered us in the cabin in the gray afternoon, and she set the hagstone on the table between us. And she told us about the mare, not the animal, the other one. The nightmare, the hag, the thing that rides. She said the old families in these hollows had lived with it the way you live with weather. It came in the deepest part of sleep, she said. and it sat on the breath of you, and it rode you the way it rode the horses. And in the morning you would be wrung out and hollow, and a little less yourself than you had been the day before. A strong person could last a long time. A weak heart, she said, looking at Philip and trying not to. A weak heart might last one night or two. She told us it had no shape of its own. That was the thing her grandmother had been most careful to teach her. It was not a beast you could shoot or a person you could bar the door against. It borrowed. It took the weight of a thing you feared and the cold of the ground and the patience of something that has all the time there is, and it pressed those together into the shape that would hold you stillest. To one person, it came as a weight. To another, as a hand. To Philip, it had come crouched and breathing, because Philip had spent a year now lying awake listening to his own heart and afraid of the morning that would not start. And the mare had simply put on that fear and worn it down onto his chest. It knew you, she said. That was the horror of it Carla could not photograph. It went through your sleeping mind like a hand through a drawer, and it found the one thing, and it became that thing. And so every person it took in a shape made just for them, which is why no two people who survived it ever described the same creature, and why everyone who heard those descriptions decided, sensibly, that it could not be real. Carla, who had been quiet, said she had read about this. Sleep paralysis. The brain waking before the body. The shadow on the chest. There is a name for it everywhere in the world, she said. In every country. Because it happens to everyone. It is not real. Gloria asked her gently, who had braided the horses. Nobody answered that. She told us the protections then, the ones her grandmother had drilled into her. A broom laid across the threshold, because the thing was compelled to count the straws and could not finish before dawn. A sieve hung in the window because it had to pass through every hole before it could enter, and there were always more holes. Salt across the sills, iron under the pillow, and the hag stone, the stone with the hole, which let you see the thing as it truly was, so that it could not pretend to be the shape of a weight, or a shadow, or a bad dream. She said to see it plainly was half of beating it, because the other half of its power was that you would lie to yourself about it in the morning. You would call it a nightmare. You would call it sleep paralysis. You would explain it away, and the next night you would not protect yourself. And that, she said, was how it took you. Not by force, by your own good sense. We laughed a little at the brooms and the sieves. Then we hung them anyway, because there was rain on the roof and a hollow old man in the corner, and there is no atheist in the foxhole, and there is no skeptic in that cabin after that morning. Terence laid his rifle across his own threshold like a skeptic and a believer at once. Just in case, he said. The phrase had stopped sounding confident. That second night, the protections held for some of us and not for others. I slept, and I dreamed of nothing. And I woke at dawn unrested but whole. And I lay there a moment in the gray trying to understand what the silence meant. The horses had not screamed. That should have been a comfort. It was not. Terence was gone. His cot was empty and cold. The rifle was still across the threshold where he had laid it, which told me everything, because Terence Riley would no more leave that gun than leave his own hand behind. We found his boot prints in the mud outside, and they led us not up toward the trail in safety, but down across the meeting of the creeks to the barn. The prints were strange. They were spaced like a man walking in his sleep, even and slow, and without the small corrections a waking man makes for the slick ground. He had walked straight as a plumb line to the barn door and through it. We found him inside, in the loft, in the old hay. He was lying on his back with his hands folded on his chest, the way you lay out the dead, and his eyes were open, and he was breathing. That was the thing I could not make fit. He was breathing, slow and even and deep. The deepest, most peaceful breathing I have ever seen on a living man. And we could not wake him. Elaine shook him and called his name and pressed her knuckles into his chest, and he breathed on, slow and even, and he did not so much as flutter an eyelid. Whatever was riding him had set the rhythm now. He had stopped fighting it. I climbed up into that loft myself because I did not want Elaine to be the only one who had to be near him. And being close to Terence Riley in that hay was the worst minute of the whole thing for me. Worse in its way than what came after, because what came after was at least loud and fast. This was quiet. He was warm. His chest rose and fell under my hand, and he was not there. There is no word for the particular horror of a body that is doing everything a living body does and is empty all the same, of a man you had heard laugh at a fire 2 nights before now, lying still and smiling faintly at the rafters while something you could not see used his lungs like a bellows. The air around him was cold, the way the air over a deep spring is cold even in summer, and it smelled of mud and old hay. And under that, very faint, it smelled the way a horse smells when it has been run too hard. Above him, hung from the rafters of the loft, every one of the long ropes the old farmers had used to hoist hay had been knotted into the same tight little braids we had found in the horses' manes. Dozens of them. Patient work. Witches' stirrups, Gloria said in a voice gone thin. That is what her grandmother had called them. The thing made stirrups of whatever hung in a barn, so it would have something to ride. We carried Terence back to the cabin between 4 of us, and he was no weight at all, light as a bundle of sticks, as though something had already taken the most of him out through his open, peaceful mouth. We laid him on his cot. Elaine sat with him and counted his breaths, and the number went down through the afternoon, slow and even. And there was nothing in her 30 years of nursing that told her how to put back into a man whatever had been drawn out of him. He stopped breathing a little after the light failed. He did not struggle. He simply let the next breath go and did not reach for another, peaceful as a child. And Elaine had her hands on his chest and could do nothing. And Philip in the corner began to weep because he understood that he had been shown his own ending. Gloria picked up the hagstone and held it to her eye and looked slowly around the cabin, at each of us in turn, at the corners, at the door. And when she had looked at all of us, she put the stone down, and she would not say what she had seen. I have thought since that the kindest thing she ever did was not tell us. And I have thought that the cruelest thing she ever did was the same. We did not sleep the 3rd night, none of us. We sat the 5 of us in a ring around the lamp with the broom across the door and the sieve in the window and the salt on every sill, and we kept each other awake by talking, because Gloria said the thing could not ride a waking mind, only a sleeping one. And so we made a wall of words against the rain and the deep of the night and the empty cot where Terence had been. We talked about everything except where we were. Oscar told us about his daughter, who he did not see enough of, and how the photographs were really for her, so she would know her father had gone somewhere and seen something. Elaine told us about a patient she had sat with 30 years before, the first one she ever lost, and how she had learned that night that the most you can sometimes do is not let a person be alone at the end. And we did not say it, but we all heard her telling us something about Terence and about Philip, who was still with us then, nodding in the lamplight. Carla did not talk much. She kept turning her camera over in her hands, and once she lifted it and looked at us through it without taking the picture. And she said she did not want to look at the screen anymore. that the screen had started showing her the leaning shape in the corner of every frame, whether she pointed it there or not. She set the camera face down on the floor. None of us picked it up, but you cannot stay awake forever. The body has its own law, and it is older than any of us. And around the blackest hour, Philip's chin sank to his chest between one word and the next, and before Elaine could reach him, his breathing changed, slow and even and deep, and we knew. We knew before she touched him. The peaceful breathing, the rhythm that was not his own. We pulled him up and shook him and shouted in his face, and he breathed on, smiling faintly now, somewhere far away and not unhappy to be there. And there was a smell in the cabin of cold mud and old hay, though the door had not opened. Gloria stood up. She told us then the rest of it, the part she had been holding back since the first morning. She said there was one cure her grandmother had taught her that worked when the brooms and the salt and the iron did not. She said you could give the mare away. You speak its name into a sleeping ear before the sun comes up, the name of the thing, and you wish it onto that sleeper with your whole heart, and the weight gets up off of you and walks across the room and sits down on them instead. The surest way to be rid of a bad dream, she said, looking at us with eyes that had not slept in 3 nights, is to give it to somebody else. She had told us on the first evening like it was a charming old saying. She told us now like a confession. And she said that Philip was already taken, that he would be gone by morning, whatever we did, and that the rest of us were marked now, every one, that the thing had our scent, and would have us one by one on the nights to come, all the way down the trail and onto the road and into our beds at home. That distance meant nothing to it, unless one of us was willing to give it away. She did not say to whom. Nobody had to say it. We all looked, without meaning to, at Philip, breathing his slow, peaceful breaths in the corner, already half across to wherever Terence had gone. He could not be saved. The name spoken into his ear would cost him nothing he was not already losing. It would simply move the weight that was coming for the rest of us onto a man who was leaving anyway. I want to tell you that we refused. I have wanted to tell you that for 20 days. Oscar would not do it. He said he had paid for the trip, and he would not pay for it with that, and he went and sat alone in the far corner with his hands over his ears like a child. And I have not stopped respecting him for it, and I have not stopped knowing that respecting him is easy because I did not do what he did. Elaine could not do it. She was a nurse. She had spent 30 years on the other side of that line, and she could not step over it even now, and she sat with Philip and held his hand and counted his breaths down toward nothing. And she chose to lose rather than to take, and she was the best of us. Carla looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said no. I want to be exact about this because it is the only honest thing I have left to give. I did not decide to let Philip be sacrificed. I want that to be clear, the way I have wanted everything to be clear, and I want you to notice how badly I want it, because that wanting is the whole sickness. I simply did not say the word that would have stopped it. There was a moment, a real moment, 2 or 3 seconds long, where I understood exactly what was about to happen and exactly how to prevent it. And all it would have cost me was my own turn under the weight, my own slow, peaceful breathing in the corner come morning. And in that moment I found, down at the floor of myself where I had never had cause to look before, a thing that wanted very much to live, and it was patient, and it was quiet, and it had been waiting all my life for a night like this one, and it kept my mouth shut for me. Carla found the same thing in herself. I saw it cross her face. We were not cruel. We were not brave. We were just 2 people who learned in the deep of one night that we would let an old man take our place, and that we could go on living afterward, which is the part the stories never warn you about. They tell you the monster will eat you. They do not tell you what you will turn out to be willing to feed it. It was Gloria who did it. Of course it was. She had carried the knowing all her life, and she would not lay it on the young woman or on me. She knelt by Philip in the last of the night, and she put her mouth to his ear, and she spoke a word I did not catch and do not want to, and she wished it onto him with her whole heart, and Philip Harper, who had touched his wife's photograph all that long first day, took the mare so the rest of us would not have to. He stopped breathing at the gray edge of dawn. He was smiling. I will never know if that was mercy or the last of the thing's cruelty, dressing itself up as peace. And it worked. That is the part I can put down. That is the part that has kept me awake 20 nights running. It worked. The rain broke at sunrise. The trail had dropped enough to cross. I took the 4 of them out, Oscar and Elaine and Carla and Gloria, 4 hours hard and 1 by truck, and I filed the report that said 2 of our party had died of heart failure and exposure in the backcountry, which is true the way the word nightmare is true, which is to say, it is the lie we tell so we can keep our good sense. The hike out was the longest of my life, and not because of the trail. Nobody spoke. We had all watched the same thing happen, and we had all made our different peace, or our different war with it, and there was nothing to say that would not make one of us into the person who said it. At the notch in the rock, the place where the birds had gone quiet on the way in, they came back, all at once. The ordinary woods closed around us again like a door swinging shut. And behind us the valley held its stillness, and I did not look back. And I have wished since that I had, because then I would know whether something stood at the tree line watching us go, or whether the worst of it had already left that place and come with us, riding light and patient in the back of someone's pack, in the corner of someone's eye, waiting for the first quiet night, and the first tired person to fall asleep in a bed it could reach. The horses were calm when we left, manes loose, sides dry. The thing was fed and resting, and it had let us go. Here's the part I have been turning toward this whole time, and the reason I am writing it down for you in particular, you who are listening to my voice in the deep of your own night. You who put a story on because the room is too quiet to sleep in otherwise. You who are already feeling your eyes go heavy as I talk. Gloria called me last week. She has not slept since. None of them have. Because giving the mare away does not end it. It only teaches it the way to your door. It knows her scent now, and it visits. And the only cure she has is the cure she taught us, which is to give it to somebody else, somebody sleeping, somebody who will take the weight off of her for one more night. And she told me that the old families had one more piece of it, that her grandmother only told her at the end, you do not even have to be in the room. The mare travels the way a story travels. You can speak its name into any sleeping ear that is turned toward your voice. I have not slept in 20 days, because I have not yet decided whether I am the kind of person who does that. I am very tired now, and you have been so still, listening there in the warm, with your eyes closing. Sleep well? The last thing Calvin Ferguson said to me before the lamps began to fail was that the mountain does not hate you. He said it the way a man says a thing he has carried his whole life and never expected to need. The mountain does not hate you, he told me. It simply has more patience than you will ever have. I wrote that down in my head and forgot it for almost a full day. I have not been able to forget it since. You should know first who I am, because the rest will not make sense unless you trust the man telling it. For 19 summers, I led people into the limestone country of the southern Appalachians. I was the one who carried the spare lamps and the rope and the small brass whistle on a cord around my neck. The one who counted heads at every chamber and counted them again before we turned for home. I knew those passages the way you know the inside of your own mouth. I knew which squeezes opened into rooms the size of churches and which ones narrowed down to nothing and tried to keep you. I had never lost a person. 19 summers, and I had never once come up the slope with fewer than I went down with. I want that on the record before I tell you what happened to the 6 who hired me that July. Because I need you to understand that I was careful. I was the careful one. They came up the gravel road in 2 vehicles on a Thursday morning, and I remember thinking they were an odd set to be traveling together. Most groups are a family, or a church outing, or a knot of young people who have read too much on the internet and want to scare themselves a little. This was none of those things. This was 6 adults who seemed to have found each other through some shared appetite I did not understand yet. Warren Holmes was the one who had made the arrangements. He was 67, broad through the shoulders, with a white beard cut close and hands that had clearly done real work for most of a lifetime. He shook my hand hard and looked me in the eye and told me he had wanted to see the deep chambers since he was a boy. There was something boyish in him still, under all that gray, and I liked him at once. That is worth saying, too. I liked most of them. Denise Stone was 39 and traveled with 3 cameras, 1 on a strap around her neck and 2 in a padded bag she would not let anyone else carry. She photographed the parking lot. She photographed the trees. She photographed me before I had said a word to her and apologized, and then did it again. She made her living, she said, selling pictures of places people were afraid to go. Calvin Ferguson was the oldest, 73, and the only one of them who was born within 50 miles of where we stood. He had grown up in a holler 2 ridges over, and he spoke slowly, and the others treated him with a kind of careful respect, as though he were a relic they had borrowed. I learned later that it was Calvin who had brought the rest of them together. Calvin who had told the story that pulled them all the way out here. I did not know that yet. If I had, I might have asked more questions. Marissa Gardner was 45 and taught middle school somewhere outside Cincinnati. She had the watchful, slightly tired patience of a person who spends her days keeping children from hurting themselves. She had read the waiver 3 times. She asked me where the nearest hospital was and how long it would take to reach it, and she wrote the answer on the back of her hand in ink. I thought she was the cautious one. I was right, and it did not save her. Roger Berry was 58 and did not believe in anything he could not put his hand on. He had made money in some business he described in 3 different ways across the morning, and he treated the whole expedition as a thing he had purchased and was therefore owed. He kept asking how deep we would go, as though depth were a quantity he had paid for and meant to collect in full. When Calvin spoke, Roger smiled the way you smile at a child reciting a poem. And there was Sylvia Chapman, 64, who said almost nothing that first morning. She stood a little apart while the others sorted their gear, and she looked at the mouth of the trail the way you look at a person you are sure you have met before and cannot place. When I asked if she was all right, she said she was fine. She just did not care for the smell of the air coming up out of the ground. I told her that was only the cave breathing. The caves take in air and let it out with the changing pressure. That it was the most natural thing in the world. She nodded and did not look reassured. We spent the first morning on the surface, which is how I always begin. I do not take people underground until they have walked a few miles in the heat and felt their legs and understood that this is work. We hiked the ridge trail up through the laurel and the hemlock, 6 miles of it, climbing into country where the trees grow close and the streams run cold even in July. It is beautiful up there. I want you to hold on to that because The rest of this story takes place where there is no beauty at all, only the memory of it. And I do not want you to think the mountain is an ugly thing. It is not. It is only old and indifferent and full. We made camp that first night in a clearing I'd used 100 times, beside a creek loud enough to sleep by. We cooked over a fire, and Warren told stories about the merchant ships he had worked as a young man, and Denise photographed the flames, and Roger drank more than he should have and laughed too loud at his own jokes. It was a good evening, the kind I had spent 19 summers collecting. It was Calvin who changed it. He had been quiet most of the night, the way the old are quiet, content to watch the young burn their energy. But sometime after the fire had settled into coals, he leaned forward and said, in that slow, careful voice, that his grandmother had grown up in this country, and that she had a name for these caves that the maps did not use. Roger asked what the name was, and there was the smile again, the indulgent one. Calvin did not smile back. He said his grandmother called them the house caves, not because anyone lived in them, because of what built houses inside them. I have led trips into those passages for 19 years, and I had never heard the term. I told him so gently, because I did not want to embarrass the old man in front of the others. Calvin only nodded, as though my not knowing was exactly what he expected, and he told us the story his grandmother had told him, and which her grandmother had told her, going back further than anyone could count. There were bats in the caves, he said. Everyone knew that. Thousands of them, brown and small, the kind that pour out of the entrances at dusk in ribbons. Those were not the ones his grandmother meant. The ones she meant were larger. They lived in the deepest rooms past where the small bats would go, in the chambers that never, in their whole existence, had felt a moment of light. They were pale, she said, pale as something that had never needed color. And they did not hang alone the way ordinary bats hang. They built. They gathered the bones of what they had taken and the leavings of the colonies and their own calfskins, and they wove these things together with a kind of spit that hardened like resin, and they made structures, mounds, hollow shapes with rooms inside them, houses. That was why the old people called them the house bats, and called the caves the house caves, and told their children that if they ever found a house down in the ground where no person had any business building one, they were to leave it be and walk backward to the light and never once answer anything that spoke to them. That was the rule, Calvin said. Never answer a voice you cannot see. His grandmother had said it to him so many times it had worn a groove in him. Never answer a voice you cannot see, because the house bats listen, and they learn, and the thing they have learned best in all their long patience is how to sound like the people they have already taken. There was a silence around the fire when he finished. The creek filled it. Then Roger laughed and said it was a fine campfire story, and asked whether the house bats also stole pies off windowsills. A few of the others laughed too, relieved to laugh, and the night went on. But I noticed that Sylvia Chapman did not laugh. She was looking at Calvin with an expression I could not read, and after a moment she asked him, very quietly, what had happened to his grandmother. And Calvin said his grandmother had died in her bed at 91, surrounded by family. But her younger brother, he said, had gone into the house caves on a dare when he was a boy of 14. And he had come out 3 days later on his own 2 feet, walking up into the daylight. And he had lived another 60 years. But he never spoke a single word again for the rest of his life. Not one. Because, Calvin said, his grandmother always believed the thing that walked out of that cave was using the boy's voice for itself. And the boy knew it and would not give it any more to learn. If you are the kind of person who looks for the place to subscribe so you do not lose the rest of a story like this one, the moment to do it is now, before we go down into the ground because I cannot promise all of us are coming back up. I did not believe a word of it. I want to be honest with you about that. I had been in those caves more times than I could count, and I had seen plenty of bats, and never anything I could not name. I thought Calvin was an old man with a beautiful and terrible story, and I thought the rest of them had paid good money partly to hear it told in the right place by the right voice. That is the thing people want, to be frightened on purpose in a safe way by someone who will lead them back to the cars. So when Warren asked me the next morning whether the deep chambers Calvin spoke of were real, whether such rooms existed past the bat colonies, I told him the truth. I said yes. There were rooms down there that I had never fully explored, past the lower colony, beyond a squeeze that I had always turned back at because there was no good reason to go further and every good reason to stay alive. I told him that no guide I knew had ever pushed past that point. I told him it was not on any map. I should have stopped there. But Warren's eyes had that boyish light in them, and Roger was already saying that this was exactly what he had paid for, the real thing, the place no one else went. And Denise was talking about the photographs, and Marissa was the only one who looked at me and waited to hear me say no. I did not say no. That is the part I carry. I told them it would be difficult and dangerous and that we would turn back the moment I said to turn back, and that everyone would obey me without question once we were below the lower colony. They all agreed. Of course they agreed. People always agree to that on the surface in the sunlight, with the cars a short walk away. We went down at first light on the second day. The mouth of the cave on that side of the ridge is not large. You would walk past it on the trail and never see it, a slot in the rock half hidden by a fallen tree, breathing its cool ground breath into the morning. We roped down the first drop one at a time, and I went last so that I could watch each of them land, and I counted them in the round room at the bottom, where the daylight still reached in a gray smear from above. 6. Warren and Denise and Calvin and Marissa and Roger and Sylvia. 6 and me. I want you to count them with me because I am going to keep counting, and I need you to feel it when the number is wrong. The first hour was ordinary, and I will say it, wonderful. The passages there are some of the finest I know. We went through a room where the ceiling lifted away into blackness, beyond the reach of our lamps, and the floor was a field of broken stone like a city that had been knocked flat. We squeezed through a section called the birth canal, which I have never enjoyed naming for a group, but which always gets a nervous laugh, and which spits you out into a gallery where the rock has folded itself into great frozen drapes that ring like a bell if you tap them. Denise photographed everything. Roger touched everything, which I told him not to do, and which he did anyway. Calvin moved slowly, but never complained, and twice I caught him with his hand flat against the wall, his head tilted, listening to something the rest of us could not hear. We reached the lower colony around what I judged to be midday, though down there the words midday and midnight mean nothing at all. You hear the colony before you see it. A dry rustling that grows and grows until it is the only sound in the world. The sound of many thousands of small bodies shifting in their sleep. Then your lamp finds the ceiling, and the ceiling is alive. A moving carpet of small brown bats packed so close they look like fur on the skin of the rock. The smell is tremendous. The floor is soft and gives under your boots with a sound I will not describe. The group went quiet, the right kind of quiet, the kind that comes over people who are looking at something genuinely larger than themselves. We did not disturb them. I led the group along the edge of the room, keeping low, lamps angled down, and I felt the old happiness of showing people a true thing. This is the deepest most groups ever go. This is where I turn them around, full of it, ready to talk about it for years. But on the far side of the colony room, there is the squeeze, a low slot at floor level where the room pinches down and the rock comes together until there is barely the height of a man's body lying flat. Beyond it, the air changes. I had been to the lip of that squeeze perhaps a dozen times across 19 years, always alone, always for a moment, and I had always backed away, because past the squeeze the bats do not go. You can see it. The ceiling of the colony room is packed solid with them right up to the edge of that slot, and then the slot is bare, clean, no bats, as though there were a line drawn on the rock that they would not cross. I had never had a good explanation for that. I had told myself it was airflow or temperature, or some quality of the stone. I told the group the same thing now. And Roger, of course, lay down in the dirt and put his lamp into the slot and said he could see a room on the other side, a big one. And he asked me what kind of guide I was if I had stood at the edge of the real cave for 19 years and never once gone in. I want to tell you that I held the line. I did not. I told them we would go through one at a time, that I would go first, that no one would follow until I called, and that the instant I gave the word we would all come back through, and that would be the end of it. I got down in the dirt, and I pushed my pack ahead of me, and I went through the squeeze into the room where the bats will not go. It was enormous. My lamp could not find the far wall or the ceiling. The air was still and cold, and it had a smell that was not the colony smell, not guano and warm bodies, but something older and drier, a smell like the inside of an old chest that has been closed for 100 years. The floor was smooth, and about 30 feet in, at the very edge of my light, there was a shape that should not have been there. It was a mound, taller than a man, rounded, gray-pale, with a texture like nothing in a natural cave. The flowstone and the columns of a cave are smooth and wet, and they belong. This was matte and dry, and it belonged to nothing. As I brought the lamp up, I could see that it was made of pieces, small pieces, thousands of them, fitted and bound. And I saw, set into the side of it, low down, an opening, a rounded doorway the height of a crouching person, leading into a hollow blackness within, a house where no person had any business building one. I did not call the others. I did not breathe. I stood there with Calvin's grandmother's voice going through me like cold water. Leave it be. Walk backward to the light. And I was going to. I swear to you that I was going to do exactly that. Then a voice came out of the darkness past the mound a little way further into the room, and it said my name. It was Warren's voice. I knew it. The same warm, broad voice that had told stories about merchant ships beside the fire. It said my name, and it said, "Come look at this. You have to come look at this." And the relief that went through me was so total, so animal, that I almost answered before I understood what was wrong, because Warren was behind me. Warren was on the other side of the squeeze in the colony room, with the other 5, where I had left them. I had told them no one was to follow until I called. And I had not called. I did not answer. I held the whistle at my chest, and I did not make a sound. And the voice said my name again, exactly the same warmth, the same words, "Come look at this. You have to come look at this," with not one syllable changed, the way a recording says a thing the same way twice. And then it stopped. And in the silence after it, I heard all around me in that great room, up high where my lamp could not reach, a sound I had been hearing for some time without letting myself know it. A soft, dry clicking. Many small clicks, layered, shifting. The sound a great many patient things make when they are listening and learning and deciding. I went back through the squeeze faster than I have ever moved in my life. I came up out of that slot into the colony room, and there were the others, all 6 of them, alarmed at my face. And Warren reached down to help me up and said, "What is it? What did you see?" And his voice was the same voice that had spoken my name in the room where he had never been. I told them we were leaving. Now, all of us. No questions. I think the thing in my face was enough, because even Roger did not argue. We turned back along the edge of the colony, and the colony was no longer sleeping. The rustling had become something else, a rising agitation, the whole living ceiling stirring and beginning to pour. And that was when the small bats came off the rock in a flood, in a panic all at once. And the air was full of them, and the lamps showed only a blizzard of wings, and someone screamed. And in the noise and the wind of them, I heard my whistle would do no good, and I blew it anyway. 3 short blasts, the signal to gather to me. When the colony had emptied past us and the air cleared and I could count again, there were 5. Sylvia Chapman was not there. I called her name. The others called her name. And from somewhere back, the way we had come, back toward the squeeze, back toward the room where the bats will not go, Sylvia's voice answered. It said she was fine. It said she had only gotten turned around. It said, "Come help me. I am just back here. Come help me." And Marissa took a step toward it before I caught her arm hard enough to bruise, because I had heard Sylvia speak perhaps 20 words in 2 days, and I knew her voice. And the voice calling us back into that room was Sylvia's voice exactly. Every tone of it. And Sylvia had been standing at the very front of our group, nearest the exit, the furthest of all of us from the squeeze. There was no way she had gotten behind us. No way at all, I told them, and I will never forgive myself for how calm I made my voice, that we were not going back for that, that whatever was calling, it was not Sylvia. And Marissa looked at me with her ink-stained hand pressed to her mouth and asked me what I meant. It was not Sylvia. Of course it was Sylvia. We had to help her. And the voice called again, the same words, "Come help me, come help me," the same way twice, the same way a recording says a thing, and I watched Marissa hear it. I watched her hear the sameness of it. I watched the understanding come into her face. And I have never seen a worse thing happen to a person than what happened to Marissa Gardner in that moment, when she understood what she was hearing and understood that Sylvia was already gone. We did not go back for the voice. I want that known. 5 of us turned away from it and climbed toward the surface and left it calling in Sylvia's stolen tones, and called for a long time, and then somewhere behind us, it stopped, and the stopping was worse than the calling. Because while it was calling, I could tell myself it was still behind us. When it stopped, I could not tell myself anything at all. The way out should have taken us a little over an hour. It took us most of forever. The cave was wrong in a way I cannot fully put into honest words, and I have had years to look for them. The passages were the passages I knew. The birth canal was where it had always been. The bell drapes rang when Roger struck them, because Roger struck them even then, even with Sylvia gone, some broken reflex in him reaching out to touch a thing. But the distances were not right. We would walk for what felt like 20 minutes through a passage I knew to be 60 feet long. We would arrive at a junction I knew and turn the way I knew led up and walk and arrive at the same junction again. I marked our route. I have always marked my route. I carry a roll of bright tape and I tear off a strip and press it to the rock at every turning so that no matter what happens, you can always follow your own marks back to the light. I tore off a strip at a junction and we walked and we came back to that junction. And my strip of tape was gone, not fallen, gone. And in its place, pressed to the rock exactly where I had put my mark, was something pale and dry and woven, a small flat ribbon of the same matte stuff the house had been built from, fixed to the stone with hardened resin, in the shape and the place of the thing it had replaced. They were learning. They had watched me mark the way, and they understood what the marks were for, and they were taking mine down and putting theirs up. And if I had trusted my own tape, I would have followed the ribbons down and down forever into the rooms where there is no light and no time and no end. I understood it all at once, and I told the others to ignore every marker, mine and otherwise, and to trust nothing but the air, because air moves. The cave breathes, I had told Sylvia that first morning. It takes in air and lets it out, the most natural thing in the world. And it was the only natural thing left to us. I wet my finger, and I found the faintest movement of cold air against it, and I followed that, and only that. The breath of the mountain going out toward the place where it met the sky. Roger died at the second drop. I will tell it plainly because he deserves to have it told plainly. We had reached the round room at the bottom of the entrance pitch, where the gray smear of daylight should have been, and there was no daylight because by then it was night above us. We had been below far longer than any of us knew. We had to climb the rope in blackness. I sent Warren up first because he was strong, and Marissa second, and Denise third, and I told Roger to go, and I would come last, as I always did. And Roger, halfway up the rope, in the blackness, with the rest of us calling encouragement from below and above, stopped climbing. He just stopped. And he said, in a strange, light voice, not at all like his own, that someone was holding his foot, that someone down below had taken hold of his foot and was asking him so nicely to come back down and see the house. It was such a fine house. There was room in it for everyone. And I was standing directly beneath him with my lamp, and there was nothing there. Nothing held his foot. There was nothing in that room but me, and the rope, and Roger hanging in the light of my lamp with his face turned down toward a thing only he could see, smiling the indulgent smile he had smiled at Calvin across the fire, smiling at last at something he believed in. And he let go of the rope with both hands. He did not fall so much as he stepped backward off it into the air gently, the way you step down from a porch, and he went past me into the blackness at the side of the room where the floor drops away into a crack no wider than a coffin, and he was gone, and the cave did not give him back. 4 of us came up the rope into the night, Warren and Marissa and Denise and me. Calvin was not among us. I have to tell you about Calvin. Somewhere in that endless climb out, somewhere in the wrong distances, the old man had fallen behind, and none of us had seen him go. We had been so close together, holding the back of each other's packs in the blackness, and still he was simply not there when we reached the bottom of the pitch, and there had been no cry, no sound, nothing. The oldest of us, the slowest, the one who had warned us, gone without a word. Without a word. I thought of his grandmother's brother walking up into the daylight and never speaking again, and I understood too late that there are worse things than silence, and that silence is what you get if you are lucky. We sat in the clearing by the loud creek until the sun came up, the 4 of us not speaking, our lamps burning down. And when there was light enough to walk, we walked the 6 miles down the ridge trail to the cars. We told the rangers. We told the sheriff there was a search. Of course there was a search. Teams went down with better equipment than I have ever owned, and they pushed through the squeeze into the great room past the colony. And I made myself go with them because I owed the lost that much. And here is the thing I have to leave you with, the thing that has kept me out of any cave from that day to this. The room past the squeeze was empty. There was no mound. There was no house woven of bone and skin and resin. There was no ribbon of pale matte stuff where my tape had been, anywhere in that cave, though I looked at every junction with the searchers watching me with their careful, pitying eyes. There was nothing in those passages but rock and water and a colony of perfectly ordinary brown bats, sleeping, undisturbed, packed right up to the edge of a squeeze, and not one of them an inch beyond it. The searchers found no sign of Sylvia or Roger or Calvin. Not a boot, not a strap, not a smear of anything. 3 people went into the ground with me, and the ground closed over the fact of them as though they had never walked the earth at all. The official finding was that they became separated in difficult terrain and were lost in unmapped passages, and that recovery was not possible. That is what the paper says. I signed a statement, and the statement is true in every fact it contains, and it is a lie from the first word to the last, because it does not say that they were taken, and they were taken, and the things that took them are patient beyond anything a person can hold in the mind, and they are still down there in the lightless rooms, learning and waiting, and they have all the time there has ever been. I told you at the start that Calvin said, "The mountain does not hate you. It only has more patience than you do." I have thought about that sentence for years now, and I think I finally understand it. And I am sorry to be the one to give it to you. It is not a comfort. It was never a comfort. He was not telling me the mountain would let me go. He was telling me that hate burns out, and patience does not, and that the things that built houses in the rooms where the bats will not go are not angry and were never angry. They simply outlast. They will outlast the searches and the statements and the paper that says recovery is not possible. They will outlast me, and they have already begun. Because here is the last of it, and then I am finished, and I will not tell this again. My sister called me 3 nights ago. She lives alone, 2 states away, and we have not spoken much since I came back from the mountain, because I am not easy company anymore. She called late, and her voice on the line was warm and ordinary and glad, and she talked about nothing, about her garden, about the weather, and I was so grateful to hear her that I almost wept. And then she said a thing, and then a little while later in the call, she said the exact same thing again, the same words, the same warmth, with not one syllable changed, the way a recording says a thing the same way twice. And I went very cold and very still, and I did not answer her, and there was a silence on the line. And in the silence, underneath it, far away and soft and dry, I heard a clicking. Many small clicks, layered, shifting, patient. Listening, learning. I have not picked up the phone since. It rings, sometimes late. I do not answer it. Never answer a voice you cannot see. His grandmother said it so many times it wore a groove in him. It has worn a groove in me now. I am telling you because someone should be warned, and because I do not think I have very much time, and because they are very good at this now, they have had so much practice, and the next voice that calls you in the warm, familiar tones of someone you love and says the same dear thing twice, the same way twice, may not be coming from where you think it is. Do not answer it. Do not go and look. And if you ever find a house down in the ground where no person had any business building one, leave it be and walk backward to the light, and do not stop, and do not turn, and whatever you do, whatever it says, in whatever beloved voice it borrows, do not answer. There's a sound that water makes right before it takes a person, and I did not learn it until the summer the Appalachian waters swallowed 5 people I was paid to keep alive. I want you to understand something before I say another word. I am not a man who scares easy, and I am not a man who lies for attention. I spent 19 years guiding people through that drowned country, the long flooded hollows where an old town once stood before the dam went up and pushed the river backward over its own roofs. I learned every cove. I learned which pools held trout and which pools held nothing at all, no matter how long you sit over them with your line in the green water. I thought the silence of those empty pools was just the way of deep places. I was wrong about that, and being wrong about that cost me almost everything. The group came to me in the second week of July. 6 of them, which was a strange number for the kind of trip they wanted, because they were not all the same kind of people. Usually a party is a family, or a fishing club, or a pack of friends who have known each other since school. This was none of those. They had met through one of those community boards in town, the kind where retired folks and restless folks post about hikes and birding and weekend trips, and they had decided to share the cost of a guide for 4 days on the water. 4 days of camping along the shore, hiking the ridge trails by afternoon, and fishing the deep coves at first light. The oldest was a man named Arnold Webb, 79 years old, lean as a fence rail, with hands that shook a little when he was not holding something, and went perfectly still the moment he picked up a rod or a paddle. Arnold had grown up 2 valleys over before the water came. He knew the country from underneath, if that makes any sense to you. He knew what was down there. Then there was Holly Kennedy, 69, a woman who hummed church hymns under her breath, the way other people breathe. She did not even know she was doing it half the time. She had a kind face and a habit of feeding everyone, and she carried a tin of butter cookies that she rationed out like they were medicine. Rita Wells was 61, sharp and dry, a retired schoolteacher who corrected my grammar twice on the first morning and then apologized and then did it again. I liked her immediately. She missed nothing. If I had listened to Rita sooner, things might have gone differently. Lester Hunter was 52, and he was the only one of them who had clearly done this before. He had his own gear, all of it worn soft from use, and he carried himself the way men do when they have spent real time alone in real country. He did not talk much. He watched the tree line the way I did. Gina Tucker was 43, the youngest woman, full of nervous energy and questions, taking pictures of everything with a small camera she wore on a strap around her neck. She wanted to see a bear. She kept saying that. I want to see a bear. I told her that what you want to see in the woods and what you want to meet in the woods are 2 different lists. And the last of them was Neil Freeman, 36, the youngest of the whole party, quiet, polite, a little lost-looking, sort of man who joins a trip like this because he is trying to fill a hole that camping cannot fill. He stayed near me most of that first day. I think I reminded him of someone. So that was the 6 of them, and that was me and the water. We put in at the old boat launch a little after noon. The lake, if you can call a drowned valley a lake, was flat and green and so still that the ridges hung upside down in it, perfect and silent. 2 worlds touching at the shoreline. I have seen that water rough, and I have seen it gentle, but I had never seen it that still, that quiet, that watchful. Lester noticed it too. He stood at the edge with his hand over his eyes and said, low so only I could hear, that he did not trust water that smooth. I told him it just meant no wind. He said that was not what he meant, and he did not explain. We paddled out to the first campsite, a flat shoulder of land between 2 coves, and we made camp the way you do, and the afternoon was ordinary and good. Gina took her pictures. Holly hummed. Rita corrected Neil when he called a sycamore a birch. Arnold sat apart near the water, looking out at the place where the cove narrowed and the deep channel ran. I went over and sat with him because he looked like a man with something on his mind. He asked me if I knew what was under us, out there in the deep part. I told him I knew the town was down there, the old church, the school, a few dozen houses, all of it drowned when they closed the dam. He nodded slow and said yes, all of that. And he said the people had been moved out before the water came. But not everything had been moved. He said his grandmother had told him, when he was a boy, that you must never answer the water when it calls your name. He said the old people believed the still water remembers, that it holds what it took, that it only claims what is given to it freely, and that a man who keeps his own counsel and never answers the water can fish those coves his whole life and die in his bed. He talked then about the empty pools, and a cold went through me, because the empty pools were the one thing about that water I had never been able to explain. Every guide on that lake knew them. There were coves where the fish simply would not go, deep green holes where your line came up clean every time. No matter the season, no matter the bait, we told the clients it was the temperature or the lack of structure on the bottom. And we believed it ourselves because believing it was easier than the alternative. Arnold said the fish stayed out of those pools for the same reason a rabbit stays out of a certain field. He said the fish were not stupid. He said the fish knew where the thing liked to lie, and they had known it for 10,000 years. And only people were foolish enough to put their boats over the deepest green and call it good fishing water. I thought about all the mornings I had paddled my clients out over exactly those pools, hunting the quiet I now understood was not peace at all. It was the held breath of a place that something owned. I asked him what they thought lived down there. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he said a word I had never heard before. The way you say a word you were taught not to say out loud. He called it Fang Malia. He said that was the name the old people gave the thing in the deep channel, the thing that had been there before the town, before the river was a river, the thing the water had been built to keep. He said the dam did not make a lake. It made a lid. I am going to be honest with you. I did not believe a word of it. I had heard 100 lake monster stories in 19 years of guiding, and they were all the same shape. An old man and a deep place and a name to scare children. I told Arnold it was a fine story and that I would keep my mouth shut around the water just to be safe. And he did not smile. He said, "You do that, son." He said it like a man giving real advice, not telling a tale. That night the water was still wrong. I lay in my tent and listened, and there was no lapping, no slap of small waves on the hull of the canoes, nothing. Lake water is never truly silent. It always moves a little, breathes a little. That night it held its breath, and so did I. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the bell. I want to be very clear about this because it is the part people stop believing. There was a church in the drowned town, and the church had a bell, and they never took it down before the water came. It is down there still, in the steeple, under 60 feet of green water in the deep channel. And at 3 in the morning, on a night with no wind and no current, I heard that bell ring. Once, a low, swollen, drowned note that came up through the water and through the ground and into my chest. One single toll, and then the silence closed over it again like a hand. I told myself it was a dream. I almost made it back to sleep. Then I heard Holly humming. She hummed in her sleep, I knew that, the same hymn, soft and tuneless and sweet. But this hum was not coming from her tent. It was coming from the water. It was her hymn, her exact, slow, careless version of it, the same little stumble on the high note that she made every time. And it was out there, in the cove, in the deep channel, rising up off that still black surface as if the lake itself had learned the song and wanted to sing it back to us. If you have ever wanted to know what real fear feels like, I will tell you. It does not make you scream. It makes you very, very quiet. I lay there and did not move and did not breathe loud, and I listened to the water hum my client's favorite hymn back across the cove, and I understood, in some animal part of me that had no words for it, that Arnold had not been telling a story at all. I did not sleep again. And when the gray light finally came up over the eastern ridge, the humming stopped, and the water began to lap at the canoes the way normal water should, and I almost convinced myself, in the safety of the morning, that I had imagined the whole thing. That was my first mistake, the one I made every morning after. I let the daylight talk me out of what the night had taught me. If you find yourself drawn to these stories, the true-sounding ones, the ones that sit wrong in your stomach long after, you already know the kind of channel this is, and following along is the only way to hear the rest of what happened in those waters. By the time the others were up and Holly was passing out her butter cookies, I had decided to move our camp. I told them I knew a better cove for the morning fishing, which was not exactly a lie. What I did not tell them was that I wanted distance between us and that deep channel. Lester watched me fold the tents faster than I needed to, and he did not say anything. But I saw him check the tree line again, and I saw him loosen the big knife on his belt without seeming to think about it. We loaded the canoes. Arnold got in last. Before he stepped off the bank, he crouched and put 2 fingers in the water, just touched it, the way a man touches the forehead of someone who was sleeping. He murmured something I could not hear. Then he got in, and we pushed off, and the still water of the deep channel watched us go, and somewhere far under us, in a steeple full of green water, a bell that no living hand could reach hung silent and waiting. We made our second camp in a cove on the far shore, well away from the deep channel, in a place where the water was shallow and clear, and you could see the gravel bottom and the small fish moving over it. I felt better there. The water moved right. It lapped and breathed and behaved like water. The morning fishing was good. Lester pulled in 3 fat trout, and Neil caught his first fish ever, and could not stop grinning, and even Rita unbent enough to laugh at something Gina said. For a few hours, it was the trip they had paid for. Arnold did not fish. He sat on the bank with his eyes on the water. And when I brought him coffee, he thanked me and then said, without looking up, that we had not gone far enough. I asked him what he meant. He said the deep channel was not a place. It was a door, and the water was all one water, and a thing that lives in the deep does not stay in the deep when it has caught a scent. He said it had heard us now, it had tasted the song. I told him we would be off the water in 3 days and home safe. He smiled at that, the saddest smile I have ever seen on a man, and he said, "Some of us." He said it gently, the way you tell a child a hard, true thing. "Some of us, son." I should have ended the trip right then. I have asked myself 1,000 times why I did not. The honest answer is money and pride, and the simple human refusal to believe that the worst thing is really happening to you, even while it is happening. I told myself an old man was rattled by old stories, and that I would not frighten 5 paying clients over him in the night, and a bell I had probably dreamed. That afternoon, we hiked the ridge above the cove. It was a good trail, steep but clear, and from the top you could see the whole drowned valley spread out below. All the coves and channels, the green water lying in the folds of the hills like something poured. Gina took her pictures. Holly hummed. And Lester, who had drifted to the back of the line with me, stopped and pointed down at the water far below. There was a wake on the lake. Not a boat. There were no other boats out there. We had the whole valley to ourselves that week. It was a single, long V cutting across the still surface of the deep channel. The kind of wake a large swimming animal makes, except that it was too long and too fast. And it did not curve the way a swimming animal curves. It went in a straight line across the channel, from one shore to the other, faster than a man could paddle, faster than a deer can swim, and then it slowed near our cove, and it stopped, and the V flattened out, and the water went still again, and whatever had made it was now somewhere underneath the cove where we were camped. Lester looked at me. I looked at Lester. Neither of us said the word out loud, but we both started down that trail a good deal faster than we had come up it. We got back to camp before the others, and Lester pulled me aside by the canoes. He told me he had done 2 tours in country where things hunted men, and he knew the feeling of being hunted, and he had it now, standing on that shore. He asked me plainly, man to man, if I knew something I was not telling, and I am ashamed to say I told him no. I told him it was probably a big catfish. The old reservoir grew them huge. He looked at the water, and he looked at me, and he said, in a flat, quiet voice, that he was going to sleep with his knife in his hand, and that I should think hard about whether catfish ring church bells. So he had heard it too. The bell. The first night. He had heard it and said nothing, the same as me. Each of us protecting the other from a fear we both already carried. That evening, Holly could not find Gina. It happened in the soft hour before nightfall, that gentle, failing light, when the ridges go blue and the water turns to pewter. Gina had walked a little way down the shoreline to get a photograph of the sunset over the water. That was all. 20 steps, no more, around the curve of the cove and out of sight behind a stand of willows that grew right down to the waterline. Holly called her in for supper. Gina did not answer. Holly called again. Nothing. And Holly came back to the fire with that tin of cookies in her hands and a look on her face, and she said, "Has anyone seen Gina?" And the whole camp went quiet. We searched the shore. I found her camera first. It was at the waterline, half in the gravel and half in the lake, and the strap was broken, snapped clean, not unclipped. Snapped. There were marks in the mud, 2 long furrows where her heels had dragged toward the water. And at the end of the furrows, the water was disturbed and clouded with stirred-up silt, and then nothing. No Gina. No sound. No splash that any of us had heard, and we had been 40 steps away around a stand of willows. I have pulled drowned people out of that lake before. Drowning is loud. Drowning is splashing and screaming, and a fight you can hear from a long way off. Whatever took Gina took her in total silence, in the time it takes to call a name twice, and it took her down into water that was barely waist deep at the shore, into a cove I had picked because the water was shallow and clear and safe. Lester crouched by the furrows in the mud for a long time. Then he stood up and looked out at the gray water and said one word, and the word he said was the word Arnold had said. He said Fang Malia, and Arnold, behind us by the fire, did not look surprised at all. He only bowed his head, and his lips moved, and I realized he was praying. We did not sleep that night. We built the fire up high, and we sat with our backs to it, all of us facing the water, and we waited for the morning the way shipwrecked men wait for a sail. Rita held Holly's hand. Neil sat next to me and shook and could not stop. Rita was the one who said it plainly, somewhere in the long middle of that night, in her dry schoolteacher voice that did not shake even when the rest of her did. She said she had been counting. She said the lake had taken Gina in silence, in shallow water, 40 steps from 5 grown people, and that no animal she had ever read about could do such a thing. She said she did not believe in monsters, that she had spent 40 years teaching children to think clearly and not to be ruled by fear of the unseen. And then she said very quietly that she also did not believe in being a fool, and that a clear-thinking person changes her mind when the evidence changes, and the evidence had changed. She looked at me across the fire, and she asked me to tell her the truth now, all of it, while there was still time for the truth to do any good. So I told them. The bell on the first night, the humming, everything I had talked myself out of. Rita listened without a word, and when I finished, she nodded once, the way she might nod at a student who had finally gotten the answer right. Too late to matter, and she said, "Well?" At least now we are afraid of the correct thing. And out in the deep part of the cove, for some time past midnight, the water began to hum. It was the hymn again. Holly's hymn. With a little stumble on the high note. But this time, when it had hummed the whole verse through, it stopped. And a voice came across the water, a wet, swollen, almost human voice, and it called a name. It called Holly. It used Gina's voice to do it. I had heard Gina talk all day, her nervous, bright chatter, and this was her voice exactly, coming up off the black water, calling Holly's name. Soft and pleading, the way you would call to someone you wanted to come closer. Holly half rose. She actually half rose, with her dead friend's voice calling her toward the water, and it was Arnold, old shaking Arnold, who grabbed her arm with a grip like iron and pulled her back down and hissed at her, "Do not answer it. Do not ever answer it. The water only takes what is given. Do not give it your voice." Holly did not answer. She put both hands over her mouth and wept into them without a sound. And the voice on the water called and called in Gina's voice, growing less patient, growing wetter and lower and less like a person with every call, until at last, near dawn, it gave up, and the water went still, and the awful, patient silence came back. I understood then what Arnold had been telling me all along. The thing in the water did not just kill. It learned, it listened, and it took, and it kept what it took. The way the still water keeps the bell and the church and the bones of the drowned town, and it used what it kept to call the next one closer. Gina was not gone. Gina was bait now. When the light came up, we found Arnold's 2 fingers in the water again, touching the surface, his lips moving. I asked him what he was doing. He said he was making the old offering, the one his grandmother taught him, asking the water to be content with what it had already taken. I asked him if it would work. He looked at me with those clear old eyes, and he said, "It has never worked." He said the old people only told themselves it might, so that they could keep living beside the thing they could not move and could not kill and could not run far enough from. He said the offering was not for the water, it was for us, so we could bear to put our boats back in it, so we could pretend the still water could be satisfied. That was the moment the comfort died in me. I had been holding on to Arnold's first rule like a life raft. Never answer the water, and it only takes what is given, and a careful man dies in his bed. I had built my whole 19 years on the belief that the deep places had rules, and that a man who knew the rules was safe. Arnold took that from me on that gray morning, gently. The way he took everything, and he gave me the truth instead. The water does not bargain. The rule was never a wall. It was only a story we told to keep our feet from running. We had to get off that lake. We had 1 canoe trip to the launch, an hour of open water across the deep channel, and no other way out. The ridge trails went nowhere but up. The road was on the far shore, past the deep part, past the drowned steeple and its waiting bell. To leave, we would have to cross the very water where the thing lived in daylight, and pray that daylight meant anything to a creature that had lived in lightless water since before there was a name for it. We loaded the 2 canoes at first light, 5 of us now in the empty space where Gina had been. And as we pushed off from that shore, the still water of the deep channel lay ahead of us, flat and green and patient. And under it, 60 feet down, in a flooded steeple, the bell began, very softly, to ring. We kept the 2 canoes close together for the crossing, gunwale to gunwale almost, because there is a kind of safety in being near another living person, even when there is no real safety to be had. Lester took the lead canoe with Rita and Holly. I took the second with Arnold and Neil. We paddled into the deep channel under a white morning sky, and the water was so still and so clear that I could see down into it farther than I ever had before, down past the green into the blue, into the place where the blue went black, and I made myself stop looking, because a man cannot paddle straight while he is staring into the place a thing is going to come up from. The bell rang the whole way, soft and slow and swollen, one toll and then a long pause and then another, rising up through 60 feet of water and through the hulls of our canoes and into the soles of our feet. Arnold said low that the bell rang when it moved. He said it was coming up. He said, keep paddling and do not stop, and whatever you see, whatever you hear, do not answer the water. We were halfway across, over the deepest part, directly above the drowned town, when Neil stopped paddling. I felt the canoe slow, and I turned around, and Neil was sitting with his paddle across his knees and his head cocked to one side, listening, with the strangest soft look on his face. I asked him what he was doing. He did not seem to hear me. And then I heard it too, what he was hearing, rising up off the water on his side of the canoe. It was a voice calling his name. A woman's voice, warm and familiar and grieving, calling Neil, Neil, the way you call to someone you have lost and found again. I did not know whose voice it was, but Neil did. I saw it on his face. It was the voice he had come out into the wilderness to fill the hole left by. The voice, the lake had somehow reached into him and found and learned, the way it had learned Holly's hymn, the way it had taken Gina's bright chatter. It was using the dead to call the living. It had found the one voice in the whole world that Neil Freeman could not refuse. I grabbed his arm. I said his name. My own voice, real and rough and alive. I said, Neil, that is not her. That is the water. Do not answer it. But he was already leaning, already reaching out over the side toward that warm and grieving voice. And he opened his mouth and he answered it. He said one word. He said a name, her name, soft and full of more love than I have ever heard in a single word. The water took him before the word was finished. It came up so fast that I have never been able to put it into proper order in my memory. There was the water, flat and green, and then there was not. There was a shape. I will tell you what I saw, and you may believe what you can stand to believe. It was long, longer than the canoe, and pale, the gray-white of a thing that has never seen the sun, and it had a body like an eel and limbs like a man, thin and many-jointed and ending in hooks. And where its face should have been, there was a mouth, a round mouth that opened in rings, and the rings were full of fangs that pointed backward down its throat, so that anything that went in could never come out. It rose up out of the deep channel with the drowned town behind it, and it took Neil Freeman around the chest with those hooked limbs, and it folded him into that ringed mouth, and it went back down, all of it, in less than the time it takes to draw a breath. And the only sound in the whole world was the bell ringing and the small splash of the place where my client had been. Our canoe rocked hard. I nearly went in, and if I'd gone in, I would not be telling you this. I caught the gunnels, and I held on, and I screamed at Arnold to paddle, paddle, and the old man, God bless him, was already paddling, hard and steady, his shaking hands gone perfectly still on the wood the way they always did when the work was real. In the other canoe, Holly was screaming. Rita had her by the shoulders. Lester was driving them forward with everything he had. We were 3/4 across now, the far shore close enough to see the gravel, and the bell was ringing faster, the tolls coming closer together, and I understood that it was coming back up, that one was not enough, that the still water that remembers everything wanted all of us. It took the lead canoe next. It came up under them. The bow of their canoe lifted clean out of the water, and the whole craft turned over and spilled all three of them into the deep channel, Lester and Rita and Holly, into the very water with the thing in it. I heard Lester roar. He did not scream like a frightened man. He roared like a man who had decided to die fighting, and I saw him in the water with his big knife in his hand, and I saw him drive it down at the pale shape that rose under him again and again. And I will go to my grave believing that Lester Hunter put steel into that thing, that it bled whatever a thing like that bleeds, because it let him go. It took Rita. It took Holly, who never did answer the water, who did everything right and was taken anyway, which is the part that breaks me still, because it proves that the rule was never real. But it let Lester go. He swam. He swam to our canoe with that knife still in his fist, and he caught the side, and Arnold and I hauled him in, and he lay in the bottom of the canoe, gasping and bleeding from a long tear across his ribs, and he said through his teeth, "Go, go," and we went. We paddled for that gravel shore with the bell ringing behind us, and the wake rising again in the deep channel, and we hit the gravel so hard the canoe split, and we ran, the three of us, up the bank, away from the water into the trees, and we did not stop until we could no longer see the lake at all. That is how three of us lived, and three of us did not. Lester survived the wound, though it left him a scar he will carry until he dies, and a silence he did not have before. Arnold went home to his bed, and he died there 4 months later, in his sleep, peaceful, which I suppose proves the only part of his story that was ever true, that a man who keeps his counsel and never answers the water can die in his bed. He did not answer it. Neither did Holly, and the water took her anyway. I have never been able to make those two facts lie down together, and I have stopped trying. They send men out to the deep channel afterward. They found Gina's camera and Lester's knife in one of the canoes. They found no bodies. The deep channel keeps what it takes. They said it was a drowning, a tragic accident. Deep cold water and inexperienced swimmers. And they wrote it down that way, and I let them, because there is no form for what really happened, and no word I could have written that would not have ended with me in a quiet room answering soft questions for the rest of my life. I do not guide anymore. I do not go near still water. I live up on a ridge now, as far from the deep places as I can get, and I sleep poorly, and most nights that is fine. But here is the thing, I cannot leave you with a clean ending, because there is no clean ending, and I will not pretend there is. Last spring, my telephone rang in the deep part of the night. I answered it without thinking, the way you do, half asleep. And there was no one there, only a sound, far off and swollen and wet, coming down the line as if from the bottom of a great green silence. It was humming. The hymn. Holly's hymn, with the little stumble on the high note. And then soft and patient and wet, in a voice that was almost my own, it called my name. I have not answered it. I think about Arnold and his rule, and how the rule was a lie that comforted the old people while they lived beside the thing they could not escape. The water takes what it wants, whether you answer or not. Holly proved that. But I find I am keeping the rule anyway, the same way Arnold kept it. Not because it will save me, but because it is the only thing left that lets me set the telephone down and turn off the light and lie still in the gloom and pretend, for one more night, that the still water has finally forgotten my name. It has not forgotten. The still water remembers everything. And some nights, when it calls, I can hear that it is getting closer.